I appreciate your prayer. Well, I hope everybody's doing well. And if I still understand the rules, I can take this thing off as long as I don't spit or anything. I'll try not to do that. Otherwise, I cannot communicate very well with this thing on. So sad. So a not so subliminal message, but I want you to carry the name. I want that to float through your thinking the whole time we're in class today. Carry the name, all right? And maybe it'll make sense as we go through this, but I think it will. Carry the name. Now, you know I'm a great artist, right? This, my friends, is a crystal ball. Somebody tell me what the future holds. What should go in there? What's happening tomorrow? What's happening 6 months from now? We make a lot of assumptions, I know, about what might be down the road. But predictions, trying to figure out what's happening in the future. Anybody ever had or heard a prediction made by someone that did not come true? Or maybe you've heard one that came true. I doubt it, but predictions.
My mother had a premonition about Pearl Harbor.
Really?
Yeah, but she didn't get it till December 8th.
So it's based on history and fact and all that. But we are, I think, a lot of us are really curious about peering into the future. And certainly, I think now, we'd all like to know, when is this going to end, right? Well, let's just be honest, we want to know, when is this going to be over with? And it really challenges our faith in some ways. It challenges a lot of things that maybe we haven't had to face before. And again, that's a whole nother lesson, but it really does relate to what we're going to talk about today. But peering into the future, and this is not a new thing, this has been something that's been of interest for a long time. You're familiar with the Mayans? Well, Mayans had a calendar that's really quite elaborate, quite complex in some ways, but apparently it was supposed to have ended, the calendar anyway, at 2012, which many interpreted to be what? End of the world. So how many years ago was that? 8 years ago? The world's still standing. But you get the point. There was a lot of attention, a lot of energy being put forth into, well, if the Mayans said it, then it must be true. It's going to happen, right? Oh, by the way, hello, Zoom folks. I won't forget you. All I see is this little gray box in front of me. But I know there are people on the other side, so we're glad you're with us today. But yeah, 2012 was supposed to be it. So that came and went, and there have been many other instances in history. Personally, one that fascinates me is a guy by the name of Nostradamus, just because he's gotten so much attention. And, you know, he was a French astrologer and apparently also a physician and a seer, right? And he actually wrote a book, but the book was written in 1555, and it was a book of several hundred quatrains, just pieces of poetry that have been interpreted in so many different ways over the years. But the idea being that he prophesied, he told the future. And if you really pay attention to that at all, you know, he's given credit for prophesying about Hitler and his rise. He's been given credit for prophesying about 9/11. And I read just this morning that there are folks out there that are giving him credit for prophesying about, you guessed it, the coronavirus. Yeah. There's a quatrain in there somewhere that, depending on how you look at the words, you might come up with that. Maybe. But the point is that he was given an awful lot of attention, some positive, some negative, but he became sort of a voice of the future. And maybe it wasn't looked at quite the same way in 1555 as it is today. But the interest in knowing, what does the future hold? what's coming. And you know the saying, we may not know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. And I don't say that in some trite cliche. That is extremely important as we venture through these last few lessons about Paul and the least of the apostles, because we're going to look at today some prophecy about Paul and how that came to pass, and as much as anything, looking at how did he respond to that and what can we glean from his response. And anybody else want to weigh in on that? Anybody have a prediction or anything that was funny or humorous? Like, I was going to be a Hollywood actor by famous project.
Well, it's interesting that, as you said, people read these things by Notre Dame or whoever,
Yeah.
but they read them after it happens. They don't tell you, or they didn't tell me, they didn't come out and say coronavirus is coming in 2020. But now that it's here, they look back and they say, see, it was prophesied.
Yeah.
Well, I can make that work with almost anything, whether it be the Bible or prophecy or Notre Dame or whatever.
That's right.
You can always predict the future after it's taken
After it's
place.
taken place. You're so right. And I think when we look at and examine just about any of those kinds of prophetic words that have happened in the past, it's more easy to predict the future when it's already happened.
People use the Bible
Yes.
and using prophecy to then making them apply to today,
True.
but they don't do it ahead of time.
Exactly.
They tell you after the fact.
That's right.
And they go, see, it was right there. You go, well, yeah.
It's been there all the time. I didn't know. Yeah. Well, what we're going to look at today was prophecy that really was initiated by the Holy Spirit, and it was before the fact. So you can really bank on that. But you're right. It's really easy sometimes to make things fit, what you want to fit. And so we peer into the future, and then we're even reminded, well, look, and I love this verse, Matthew 6:34. Don't worry about tomorrow, take care of today, because why? Well, tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. And I think the point there is, well, let's be faithful. I think I've heard Dale say this from the pulpit once. Let's learn how to be faithful for what's in front of us today. What we have. When we wake up and we have the day that's been given to us, let's be faithful. That doesn't mean we don't think or plan a little bit for the future. You got to do some of that. We don't put all of our hope and trust in what might be coming. We're faithful for today. Because there's enough, and I think we all can relate to that very easily. There's enough going on tomorrow or what's coming in the future that let's take care of right now. So this is some good work. So we're going to look at the prophecy that Jesus gave to Ananias about Paul. We're going to see how that was fulfilled. And we're going to see how it really continues to unfold throughout the book of Acts. So that's where we're at today. Now, do you think Paul feared death?
No. Well, if he did, he's going to have to avoid it because he kept putting himself in there.
Oh, feeling is always in harm's way.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like he avoided it. I don't think he looked forward to it, but he didn't run from it.
Yeah, he may not have known exactly how or when he was going to perish, but he knew, didn't he, that he was going to perish, that was going to happen. And I think it's interesting to think about what might have been going through Paul's mind. And one thing that we do know is this right here. This was what everything he was about. And what name are we talking about?
Christ Jesus.
Yeah. And I know I've read this before, but it jumped off the page at me when I was reading some last night. Carry the name. What does that mean to you? What kind of diverge here? What does that mean to carry the name?
Spread the gospel of wherever you go.
All right, gospel wherever you go. Okay, what else?
Be proud.
Be what now?
Be proud of it.
Be proud of the name in which you are carrying. And we're not talking about an empty vain pride. We're talking about
Not being ashamed.
not being ashamed.
Remember, his family always told him, remember who you are.
Yeah.
Talking about, you're representing the family, you're representing God.
So carry the name, and I
Be a good representative.
of that name.
Sure. Yeah, because you can carry it to not be, I suppose. Well, I'm sure you can. Yeah. And I wonder, from a practical standpoint, with the world today, how much, this is always important, don't misunderstand, but maybe the importance is magnified now in some ways for us as his people to carry the name. But anyway, and I think Paul, if you really look at what he was about, that was everything to him, right? Carrying the name. That's what mattered most to him. And then as an extension of that, he was very, 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 very motivated to make sure others that were lost knew about Christ. So his love for the Lord, his love for Christ, his love for carrying the name equated with love for others. And that, again, that really hit me so hard. I was like, wow, we talked about love and how we need to love our fellow man and all that. And Paul apparently had an understanding of the only way you can love your fellow man is if you're carrying the name and loving Christ to begin with. I mean, that's my perspective for what it's worth. And so as an extension of that, then we're happy, we're joyful to spread it, to share it, to carry it, like Paul was. And he even mentions in Romans 9:3, he says this, for I could wish that I myself were accursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my brothers, my kinsmen, according to the flesh. What's he saying there? What's Paul saying here about his brothers, about his kinsmen?
The Jews.
But what would he prefer happen based on this verse?
They would be saved and him not.
Exactly. He would be fine with being cut off from Christ, no longer carrying the name, if it meant that others, his brothers, his kinsmen, would come to Christ. So you get that, right? I mean, he really knew what that was about. And then we go back to Acts 9, which is somewhere we spent a little bit of time back in the first couple of weeks. I just want to remind you here of what Jesus says about Paul. And then if you want to look ahead just a little bit, we're going to go back to Acts 21 here in a minute. We're going to spend a fair amount of time there, at least the time we have left in class today, looking at some of the things that happened in Acts 21. But as a prelude, as a reminder, let's look at Acts 9, 15 and 16. And the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to carry my name, there it is, carry my name, for the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel, for I will show him how much he must suffer for the sake of my name. All right, so two things are happening here, right? We're being reminded that it was told that he was going to be a witness, right? He was going to be the person, this word instrument, to carry the name. So he wasn't just a preacher, a teacher, he was an instrument. And I think in some ways a finely tuned instrument. You know, I love music and I've played music for years, and that really resonated with me too, the whole idea of an instrument and what it does, whether it's a musical instrument or a scientific instrument or something else. But I think about musical instruments and you use them to make music. He was an instrument finely tuned, ready to do this very thing, to carry the name for Gentiles. And again, we know that wasn't how things were done. Gentiles, they don't equate, but now they do. Under Christ, Gentiles, Jews, the same. Even kings, even the children of Israel, it doesn't matter. He's taking that name to everyone. But he's going to suffer. So why did Paul keep going if he knew he was going to be suffering? That's the only thing I can figure, is that his love for Christ and for the lost was so strong.
Well, he was so zealous before he met Christ.
He was,
And then find out he was wrong, and maybe to entitle for all the wrong that he's done before.
It does make you wonder, but we do know, at least on the face of the way Scripture is presented, that nothing was going to stand between him and this. And reaching out to others. So he was at once a witness and a sufferer. And that's where kind of this story is going, about those predictions, those prophecies about his suffering. And that's when we get to the main text in Acts 21. So if you have that with you and can take a look at it, as always, I want to take the time to read through it. It's not a lot of verses, but I want us to hear it together and then think about what this message is for us today. But in advance of that, I want you to think about, when you get to verse 13, don't skip ahead, too late, you get to verse 13, take a quick look at Paul's reaction. Let that really sink in. And I want you to think about, well, if you were in that situation, what might have been your reaction? What might have been something that you thought or said? So let's look together, Acts 21, 10 through 14 to begin with. While we were staying for many days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea. And coming to us, he took Paul's belt and bound his own feet and hands and said, "Thus says the Holy Spirit, this is how the Jews at Jerusalem will bind the man who owns this belt, and deliver him into the hands of the Gentiles." When we heard this, we and the people there urged him not to go up to Jerusalem. Verse 13. Then Paul answered, "What are you doing, weeping and breaking my heart? For I am ready, not only to be imprisoned, but even to die in Jerusalem for the name of the Lord Jesus." And since he would not be persuaded, we ceased and said, "Let the will of the Lord be done." That's some powerful stuff, isn't it? Wow. Those words just jump off the page at me. First, we had a show and tell experience with Agabus. If I read this right, he literally took Paul's belt and showed, this is how you're going to be bound. I mean, Agabus showed him, this is how you're going to be bound up with this I'm assuming, leather belt. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, so he's talking about what's going to happen, prophesying, showing him exactly what's going to happen, and going through that and talking about what's going to transpire. The people that were with him were what? Were they happy about it? They were very much concerned, so much so that they were trying to protect him, right, and encouraging him to stay here. Don't go to Jerusalem. But because he does this, he's not listening to him. But look at what he says in verse 13. Basically saying, "Well, what are you doing? Why are you upset? Why are you having this emotional outburst?" That's kind of how I read it. Why are you doing this? Because, man, this one gets me right here. Because he says, "I am ready." Right? I am ready. To do what? To run? What's he ready to do?
To even die.
Yeah. He's ready to die. There was something else, wasn't there?
Be bound.
Yeah. So, and maybe these go in a particular order of it, but to die or to be bound. That's a D, by the way. So this is Paul. I am ready. Fast forward to today. You know, I've worked with a lot of older individuals over the years, and have had even relatives that would fall into this category. But when they get to a certain point in their life, and you talk to them, and then the conversation rolls around to passing away or dying, some will say, "Well, I'm ready to go." And as a younger person, you know, and especially if it's a relative, you know, it's hard to hear sometimes. Really, you're really ready to go. But I can stand in front of you, and you can probably also attest to this, that we all know people that have said, "I'm ready to go. I'm right with the Lord. I'm ready." So, you know, that's fine. But here's Paul, right in the midst of his mission, right in the midst of his carrying the name. And he knows, he's been told, you're going to suffer. And he goes on anyway. Why? Well, because of the name of the Lord. That's it. That's all. Because of the name of the Lord. I'm willing. I'm ready. At any time. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I struggle with that one. Some days I feel like Please don't think I'm suicidal, I'm not saying that. But some days I think, okay, I think I'm ready. Why keep, messing around on this earth? Let's go. But then I stop and think, well, if I'm still here, why? Well, that's a question most of us can't answer, but if I'm still here, do what? Yeah, carry the name, for every minute that we have. And I'm not trying to guilt us at all. Please don't misunderstand. But when anybody's at that point, like Paul, it doesn't matter whether you're 90 years old or 19 years old. You can be ready, right? If you're in the right relationship with Christ and you're ready to go. But anyway, so as this ends, it's kind of fascinating. It's like, well, as is true of a lot of things with Paul, well, we couldn't change his mind. So, and look what they said, let the will of the Lord be done. All right, so if that's the will of the Lord, then okay, so be it. So what do you think? Can you relate to that reaction from Paul? No, I'm sorry, we're close. That's good. What's the password?
Carry the name,
Do what?
carry the name.
There you go, carry the day. That's the word, the phrase of the day, the phrase of the page. So can you see or hear yourself responding the way Paul did? It's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? And I'm not asking you necessarily to share that, but it's something you need to think about. It certainly hit me when I was looking at it, but wow, could I say that right now? Could I say the same words that Paul said? That I'm okay with being bound up or I'm okay with dying, if that's the Lord's will. And let's be honest, in the current world we find ourselves in, this has been an interesting idea. A lot of people talk about it, and a lot of people don't talk about it as well. And I'm not even talking about taking your own life. I'm just talking about we're done with this suffering. We're done with all this going on. Maybe what follows is better. But not to leave us on a down note. That's not my intention. But I'm just so enthralled in a way about how this jumps out at us and how Paul, that's what he was about, even in the face of knowing that he's going to suffer. So, getting into a little bit more detail about this, let's look at Acts 21, starting verse 27. And to me, this is a very fascinating scene. You kind of look at it almost as a movie scene that's happening, and all these things are going on. And I couldn't help but read this and go, well, that sounds kind of familiar. And you'll see what we mean as we go through this. But Acts 21, verse 27. When the 7 days were almost completed, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, of course, they see Paul doing what he does in Jerusalem, in the temple, they stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere." I love that line. Everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place. It's that guy. It's him. Can you imagine? The mob pointing it out. I don't know how many people were there, but it was more than one. So it was enough to create, a scene. And they're out there saying, "We need your help. Here he is. Here's the guy," pointing him out. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. Oh my goodness. For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him to the temple. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. When I see that, I think mob, people running together, a group of people all running together. They seized Paul, they dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. And as they were seeking to kill him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Then the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing, some another, as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar. He ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he came up to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. For the mob of the people followed, crying out, "Away with him!" Whew, man. A lot of action going on right there. Can you imagine? And one of the questions here is to think through, sort of list what happened. So I've done that. Try to find a list. And you can easily enough do this, but I changed the words just a little bit. The Jews incited the crowd. What's it mean to incite something? Stir it up. Yeah, I used to work with a gentleman, and I have to give this example because it stayed with me all these years. An older man that I had a great deal of respect for. And he was talking about some issues that were going on in a place that we were working together. He said, he said, it's kind of like having, I grew up on the farm, it's kind of like having a bucket of manure sitting here. He said, if you leave it out in the sunshine, this is gross, but it makes the point. It crusts over and you don't smell it. But as soon as you start stirring it up, everything starts stinking again. So that's what we got going on in this place. People are stirring it up. Well, it's that idea of inciting things, stirring things up till it stinks, till it's bad. So the Jews incited the crowd. They physically assaulted Paul. Now that's language that we're hearing these days, right? Physically assaulted. Well, they did. They physically assaulted him, and they were protesting. Oh, there's that word you've heard a lot lately. They were protesting against him, weren't they? Absolutely. And they accused him of doing a few things. Teaching against the people, teaching against the law, and defiling the holy place by bringing some Gentiles in here. He's in a whole world of trouble, wasn't he? Why? Carrying the name, didn't matter whether you were the people or the law or the Gentiles. He's carrying the name. He's in the synagogue. He's preaching. He's teaching. The Jews are flipping out. They just can't believe this is going on. So the entire city is incited. Now, I'm not going to split hairs here. I'm assuming that to mean everybody that was there was revved up and upset. So who knows how many people that could have been. The entire city was incited. People band together. It's not that you had a few rogues over here. Everybody was band together. And physically restrained Paul. So not only were they assaulting him, they physically restrained him. And then in that process, the mob dragged him. Didn't move him, they dragged him. Dragging implies what?
He wasn't going willingly.
True, and somebody's usually on the ground or almost on the ground, so they're being forcefully pulled out of whatever space they're in. And this, if you don't pay attention to it, you'll miss it. It's like, okay, we got him out of the temple, then they did what? They locked the door behind him. They locked the gate. That's the way I read it. So we got you out, you can't go back in, the mob is upon you. And whenever there's violence, we sometimes wonder, well, what's the intention of this violence? And what did they intend to do to Paul? Kill him. So they had murder on their minds, not just to harm him, but to kill him. And not only kill him, but kill him by physical beating. So imagine that, this mob, many people, more than one, set upon him, restraining him, assaulting him, physically beating him. Now, were they using implements or rock? I don't know. But even if it was just fists or hands, enough of those, in the right place at the right time, could kill a person. But they were going to kill him. How does a group get so incited that the only option they can come up with is to kill the source of that frustration? I guess we can ask ourselves that question. Things going on in our world, right? But how does that happen? Well, because he was accused of some interesting things. And then it says, and this is my word, Jerusalem is now in mass panic. They're in panic mode. I would suggest they're out of control because it says that they're confused. Confusion is about it. And I'll tell you guys, that is a great strategy for fomenting a group of people, is to confuse them. Yeah, it works. And then in the midst of all that, we have these, the tribune. And the tribune was basically a Roman who was probably military, was in place there near the temple. And actually some things I read is that there was actually an addition built on to the temple where these barracks might have been located. so that you would think, well, why are these guys hanging around the temple? Well, they're there, and so apparently it was such a big protest that it got their attention, right? And so he went to see what was going on, took some soldiers with him. They intervened, and what happened when they showed up? Beating stopped. Nothing going on here. Nothing happening here, officer. Look the other way. And then what did the tribune and the soldiers do?
Try to find out what's going on.
They tried to figure out what was going on, but they arrested him. They put him in chains. And that's an interesting thing to me. Maybe that was just their prescribed method for containing the situation, containing this person. But then he asked the question, well, who are you? So I guess they didn't really know who Paul was. And what are you accused of? It seemed like legitimate questions. But did they get an answer? No. The crowd continued to foment. The crowd continued to be out of control. They got louder and louder, shouting. Sounds kind of like what happened to Jesus when he was about to be crucified. Crucify him, crucify him. The crowd fomented. So it got to be so out of control that they wanted to remove Paul. And the soldiers themselves apparently carried him out and took him away due to the violence of the mob. And it ends with, that whole scene ends with, away with him. Now, what do you think away with him really means?
Killing.
Yeah. It's not just, it just toss him out inside the city gate. They didn't soften their stance. They wanted him to be gone, whatever that took, but mostly dead. They want him to be no longer around. Yes, sir.
You know, you talking about this, how funny it is in a way that they're getting after Paul for doing, well, he was just like they were, persecuting the Jews,
Yeah.
and jumping on them and stoning them, and then here we go.
Yeah.
He's getting his.
That's right. Why? Keep going back to that, because he refuses not to carry the name. That's what he's all about. And even with this, even after this, does he continue to carry the name?
Mhm.
And we'll see, probably not in this lesson, but we really only have, what, 2 more times together, I think, before this series is over with. I think the Sunday after Thanksgiving. But looking at what happened to Paul throughout these verses, looking at what Jesus said, looking at what Agabus said, Paul accepted. We've already seen that. He accepted his lot. So out of that list of things that I just mentioned, which of these things would you rather not have to go through? Let's personalize it for a minute. Which of those would you rather not have to do? Be beat up?
Yeah, I just say not to do that. I just say not be chained. I don't think there's any of it that's true.
Appreciate that answer, because I look at it, I don't want any of that. Wow. I don't want any of that. I don't know what I would do.
I'm not like the part about being rescued.
Maybe a few soldiers showed up.
Yeah, I can handle being bound as long as they have to wait, and then I take it.
Yeah.
That'd be about it.
So none of us really want the things that happened. But what about things that were said about him? Would we be okay with hearing those things being said about us?
Well, I gather it must be lies. Yeah, because they were, I mean, mobs don't usually, one line leads to another line, leads to another line. They don't, and most of the time they're extras anyway. And the commander asked him, oh, you're not the Egyptian who did this?
So
So
he didn't really know.
there obviously was something going on that was not true. And he didn't evidently take that Trophimus in the temple, even though he was accused of it.
Right. Yeah, you go back to the beginning of those verses and you look at the accusations to begin with. This is the man who was teaching everyone everywhere. Would you care if people said that about you? I would be. If I could put that on my tombstone, I'd be pretty happy. Here's the funny thing about tombstones: we don't get to see them anyway. Just thought I'd point that out. That's for others, right? But think about that. I mean, as a child of God, if somebody said, "Oh, yeah, that's the guy that teaches everyone everywhere about the truth, because that's what he was doing. He wasn't going around blaspheming. He wasn't going around, trying to incite riots himself. He was still carrying the name, still teaching and preaching the truth of the gospel. And we sometimes have to stop and remember, what is the gospel intended to do? What does it do? Saves us. That's exactly right. Our obedience to the gospel saves us. And that's what Paul is trying to do, save these people. But of course, they don't get it. They don't want to get it. We know a lot of the dynamics surrounding that, but look at that teaching. It says he brought a Greek to the temple. Well, somebody said, oh my goodness, Tony brought a sinner to church. Shame on him. That's kind of what I read. Oh my word, he brought us.
Well, the other thing is they make an assumption just because they saw him with somebody the day before that
Guilt
the
by
people that he
association.
was with were Greeks, and they weren't. They were Jews.
Yeah, guilt by association.
He's preaching against the people, and he was preaching about Jesus.
Yes.
So, I mean, the lie's already started.
Yeah, that's right. And it's hard to navigate through the lies that are being said about you, because then all of a sudden the burden of proof is on you. But with him, I can't stop saying, going back to this, he's still carrying the name. So whatever people are saying, you're right, he's kind of, I wouldn't say Teflon in a sense, but he doesn't seem to allow those things to really.
He wasn't ashamed of what he was doing.
No, he was not ashamed. He doesn't seem to let those things get in his head and roll around like I would, probably some others of us would too. And just some other things, that was mostly about things that were being said about him, except, when you get down there, and we've already shown where the tribute really didn't know what was going on. He just knew it was a big upheaval, and, as a military person, he was a peacekeeper. So he was going to try to figure out how to squash this, whatever's going on down here at the temple. And so he does, but he really didn't have a clue what was going on. But interestingly enough, it's a question that we kind of have to look at. Well, how would we respond? And sometimes when we go take backward glances like that and we look at that period of history, sometimes it's easy to go, well, that was then. This is now. Things are different.
I used to think it would never happen here, but now I've changed my mind. It's good.
Obviously we see those kind of examples of mobs and how all that transpires and what follows. But Paul, he reminded us, and of course in 1 Corinthians, about the idea that, well, follow me as I follow Christ. Follow me as I carry the name. And so he was not ashamed. And he continued. And so that message is certainly true right now, 2020. It shouldn't change, right?
Yeah.
It's timely.
And we keep going through it. He stands up and talks to the Jews, and then he talks to the council, and he says the same thing. So he's not trying to endear himself.
So do you think we'll quit meeting because the government tells us to, or are we gonna say, I cannot keep from speaking his name?
I don't know the answer to that.
Government.
We've already been down that road. We've already stopped meeting because of it.
Exactly, that's what it's.
Now we're doing what we're doing now and
It's a
trying
little
to,
worrisome.
trying to exercise precautions, at least from my perspective, we're trying to have respect for our fellow Christians, the people in the building, and that piece of it for sure when we meet. But that's a good point. Is the fire in our bones? We carry the name no matter what.
So if we go down to it, legally, they can't make us stop. They can wish they could, but they can think they can, but
Yeah,
within the Constitution.
we spend a lot of time arguing about what might happen if it was brought about against.
Well, I'm not
again.
big-headed, but I'm praying not.
Right. And if churches decided to go against that advice. But that's why I'm not a shepherd. Looking at Charles. That's why I'm not a shepherd. These are tough things. And I really appreciate, the thoughtfulness that our shepherds, and I think Randy said it really well in his prayer, that we gotta have
valid reason that we might have to have that happen. I mean, if they were just saying, you know, we're closed on the churches because we don't,
Yeah,
they're all tax exempt and we don't get to, you know,
right.
that would be different than what they're asking us to do now.
Robert, the question is asking.
Yeah, asking instead of telling. So maybe in this lesson, we can kind of pull it together and say, perhaps for us today, God uses storms and change and upheavals and frustrations and whatever word you want to use to describe even our situation today to grow us, perhaps. Well, not perhaps. We are in a bit of a trial period, aren't we? That sounds really mild, doesn't it? It's your 90-day trial period. No, that's all I mean. Ever since this happened, it's been trying. It's been a trial.
When 9/11 happened, nobody could have imagined it, and we thought we'd never recover, and never is a long time, but it's changed things in our life, but we're still able to, and this will change so many things.
It will change.
And we'll learn things from it, for the medical profession will. And just like they said during war, there's so much medical advancement. It's an awful way to get that knowledge. But you're not responsible for who started a war. You have to deal with it.
So, deciding, are we going to be better as a result of this? Or are we going to be bitter as a result of this?
We touch somebody's life that some people just were really at the bottom of their emotion and they had no money, they didn't know where to turn.
So it's challenging now, and it has been. And, how we respond, you hear all these plays, how we respond to the challenge is the main thing, but that's true. How do we respond in light of what we've seen from Paul? We still carry the name. We're still children of God. That hasn't changed.
God is still in control.
God is still in control, and He still holds the future. All those things. So I just heard the bell, but I was thinking back about things like the Great Depression. And all of us in this room, I assume, have had relatives or had relatives living at some point during that time. And just to talk about that period of history in this country, I mean, it really destroyed the country economically.
One of the things that pulled us out of it was the world was a war. We didn't start it, but
You don't mind, I just did not have another war.
things came from that there's hard life. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad that's going to happen.
Even the big flu pandemic in 1918. I was talking to someone just yesterday, on Friday, who one of their relatives, I guess it was her great-grandmother, was born right in the middle of all that. And she survived it, but that was also really bad.
Polio scared.
Yeah, polio. I have relatives that were affected by polio. So yeah, we know. We go take a backward glance. We know there have been things that have happened in this world in our own history that have been horrible, and we've been able to be seen through that. God is faithful. So don't lose hope. Please don't lose hope, and realize we got examples. Paul was one of those. He considered himself the least of the apostles, but here he is in this scene we just looked at. He's experiencing things that I dare say most of us have never experienced, and don't want to, yeah. But he did. Why? Have I got you sufficiently brainwashed yet? Carry the name. I know some of you guys are so good at this that I can learn a lot from folks, but carry the name.
It seems like people that have made such a dramatic change in their lives, it's kind of like a pendulum. Sometimes I think my pendulum doesn't swing far enough one way.
That's a good point.
Somebody that we had members here a long time ago that converted from some denominational thinking, and there's so much on fire because they had been teaching wrong for so long that they were trying to not win, it's not a check and balances, but trying to mitigate the damage of
Well, and when they, yeah, you're right, and when they know the truth, they can't help but want to share that, and especially with those that were maybe like they were in the past, not knowing the truth, following error. So we can't necessarily peer into the future, but I can say this: we were supposed to wear masks, so that's part of the future for a while. So I appreciate everybody. It's good comments, and we'll see you next week, Lord willing. I hope you have a great week. Be careful out there.